Now, Lincoln is the classic moderate that is moving in the direction of emancipation. But what he tries to do first, and some folks wrote about this in their uh, uh, papers for the New York Times, what he tries to do, he actually sits down and he does some calculations, and he calculates that actually purchasing slaves uh, from Southerners is cheaper than fighting the Civil War. Hold on for a second. I just opened up Skype by mistake. Force quit. And so the first slaveholders that he approaches about this are the slaveholders in Missouri and Kentucky, the Unionist slaveholders that stayed with the Union. And I think this is maybe a little bit surprising to you all that there might be slaveholders who stick with the Union, but this was true in Kentucky, it was true in Missouri and Maryland and Delaware as well. So in early summer of 1862, Lincoln meets with some of these folks, especially from Missouri, and he says he tries to persuade them to set an example to the rest of the South by allowing the government to purchase these slaves. He said the unprecedentedly stern facts of our case could no longer be ignored. And Lincoln said, look, there's a lot of pressure on me to free slaves. And basically what he was saying to these folks from Missouri was, you either let the government buy the slaves or they're going to be emancipated and you're not going to get any compensation for them, which is ultimately what happens. He said, if the border states, and this is Lincoln now, did not make a decision at once to emancipate gradually, the institution in your states will be extinguished by mere friction and abrasion. I love that line. It will be extinguished by mere friction and abrasion, by the mere incidents of this war, and you will have nothing valuable in lieu of it. So either emancipate, let me buy your slaves, or they're going to be freed and you're not going to get anything for them. But interestingly, these delegates, these were congressmen, mostly from Missouri, politicians from Missouri, they said no. They heard Lincoln, they heard his argument, and they said no. Overwhelmingly, they rejected Lincoln's offer to have the government purchase their slaves because they argued it would be a radical change in our social system. So this once again, gets to the point of how just incredibly deeply seated slavery was in the states of the South, including Missouri and Kentucky. It's not only really a question of labor, although that's significant, but it's also about the racial hierarchies, right, in these states as well. This feeling that if slaves are emancipated, African Americans and whites would start marrying, African Americans would gain equality with whites in when it comes to voting, this fear of a race war. Folks in Missouri and Kentucky, even Unionists, felt this as well. And they don't want to free the slaves because it would upset the racial hierarchy, which puts, obviously, whites on top. And I think what we're getting here is the point that I'm really stressing this semester, more than I've ever stressed in my Civil War classes, how deep-seated racism was in the United States, even in the age of emancipation. That emancipation it solves the issue of chattel slavery. It does not come close to solving the issue of American racism. So Lincoln is pretty shocked. It's very eye-opening to him that these slaveholders in Missouri refuse overwhelmingly to have the government buy their slaves. And he had been moving in the direction of emancipation even before this meeting. He was trying to kind of figure out a middle way. He was hoping these folks from Missouri and Kentucky, that if they allowed the government to buy their slaves, that would be an example to folks in Texas and Virginia, and that the war might end peacefully. But I think he realized that this is just not going to happen, that No one was going to give up slavery, no Southern white, willingly, even for compensation. That they're willing to take the risk that they won't get any compensation instead of voluntarily ending slavery. So this was a big turning point for Lincoln. And remember to step back for a second, the military context is this. Grant, a couple of months before in April, he'd been surprised at Shiloh. He'd recaptured the field the next day, but his army, the army in the West, was moving toward Corinth pretty slowly. It was a little bit stymied. It had made much more progress in the army in the East, but there had been a significant setback in the West. And of course, in the East, as you should know by now, McClellan is just about to, have a massive failure in the Peninsular Campaign, which is going to allow Robert E. Lee not only to throw McClellan back, but to go crazy in Virginia in the summer of 1862, all the way to the point he invades Maryland. Lee invades Maryland. So the military context is things aren't going well. Long story short. So what he does is he just starts sanding out his cabinet. I mentioned this once before. He's going to a funeral of one of his cabinet members' child had died. One of their children had died, and Lincoln's in a carriage with Seward, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of the Navy, and we know this because the Secretary of the Navy kept a diary, and he said that Lincoln told them, and they were quite surprised, that emancipation was a military necessity. And by the way, this is the two words that you should use when you think about emancipation: military necessity. That's Lincoln's phrase. In military necessity versus moral necessity. That we must free the slaves or ourselves be subdued. This is Lincoln talking again. That slaves were undeniably an element of strength to those who held their service, i.e. Southern whites, and we must decide whether that element should be with us or against us. So, secretly, as I've talked about, Lincoln had decided to free the slaves. Now, there was also a cabinet meeting that Lincoln held where he told his entire cabinet about his decision. And we know about this meeting because Lincoln had his portrait painted, and it was kind of a slow process, and they were chatting, and Lincoln told the painter the story of emancipation. And then the painter later wrote a memoir about it, and it rings true. And what Lincoln told the painter is that he told the cabinet that he decided to issue the emancipation when Seward said, "I approve of the proclamation, but don't do it now. The country's depressed because of the military failures, and it may be viewed as the last measure of an exhausted government, a cry for help. The government stretching forth its hands to Ethiopia, i.e. for African Americans, instead of Ethiopia stretching forth her hands to the government. That it might be considered our last shriek on the retreat." Our last shriek, and apparently that was the exact phrase that Seward used, the last shriek on the way to defeat. And this is where Seward convinces Lincoln to wait until there's enough of a victory. And as I've talked about, and as the documentary talked about, that came at Antietam. It wasn't a great victory. It was really more, it was a kind of a tactical draw, but a strategic victory because Lee did have to withdraw his forces from Maryland, which was Union territory, back into Virginia. But it offered Lincoln the cover that he needed to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. So Antietam is probably the turning point of the Civil War. It may have been the closest the South came to winning the war militarily.